Welcome back to Raw Green. Francesco and Emma here. Today we're jumping into a sector that powers 90% of global trade. But most people never think about it. Emma, give us the headline. What are we talking about today?
We're talking shipping. So about 11 billion tonnes of goods are transported by sea each year, and that equates to about 1.5 tonnes per person. So we're all heavily reliant on ships, and they all still run on fossil fuels. So maritime is one of the hardest industries to decarbonise, and we're not just transforming the global shipping fleet, but the ports and the wider transport systems connected to them.
Exactly, because decarbonising shipping isn't just about swapping fuels. It's about rethinking how vessels move, how ports operate, and how the whole system works together. It is single-handedly one of the biggest transitions happening in global trade. And today, we're speaking with someone right at the center of that transition. Grant, welcome. Could you start by telling us who you are and what you do at Hitachi?
Yes, thank you for having me on and the warm welcome. So yes, my name's Grant Brown. I work at Hitachi, where I'm Director of Corporate Strategy in Hitachi Europe. And whilst I've been doing that, we've been writing our strategy for how we're going to grow the business over the next 5 years. And within that strategy, obviously, there's many elements of it, how we deal with things such as deglobalization, increasing trade barriers and those areas. But key to our strategy and our plan for growing going forward is decarbonisation. We provide energy solutions, we provide digital solutions, we provide transport solutions, and really all of these, the nexus of how they come together is decarbonisation. So it's a really important sector for us. We're well known in rail. We've done quite a lot of bus electrification, depots, and we also do electrolysis and green e-fuels. But shipping is a newer sector for us, and we're hoping to get involved and expand our decarbonisation journey into that sector as well. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Grant. That's wonderful. And I certainly, if you jump onto the Hitachi website, I was interested to see that it positions itself as a climate solutions provider across all of those different sort of intersections, strategy, technology. And some of those are the toughest sectors to decarbonise. So from your perspective, what's the starting point for decarbonising a sector such as maritime and shipping, knowing how complex it is?
Yeah, it's really difficult. And, we've actually, as I say, we're trying to take some of the lessons we've learned from doing things such as EHGV projects, because often, you get into this chicken and egg problem of who's going to pay for the fuels, who's actually going to put the infrastructure in first. Do you put in the infrastructure before anyone is actually using it? And actually, we've seen that a little bit with biofuels. The cost of biomethanol in Rotterdam now, for example, is very cheap because the investment has happened ahead of ships actually burning it. So it is a challenge, especially that chicken and egg type problem. Regulation helps, and I think Fuel EU is almost certainly the biggest driver that will move us towards that. But also companies such as Hitachi and others that want to invest ahead of these markets. I think we play quite a key role in this. Someone has to go first and make that jump. And I think as a Japanese company, we tend to take a longer view on things, and therefore we are able to invest early in these sort of technologies such as hydrogen, such as electrolysis, and such as shore power for ships.
If we wanted to start, let's break it down from offshore to onshore. Okay, let's start from offshore. What are the most realistic pathways for cutting emissions from vessels themselves?
Yeah, so we will have a multi-fuel future because ships come in so many different sizes and they do so many different routes. So it's not going to be as simple as perhaps road transport, which I think we know will be largely batteries, or even aviation, where we know that the answer is likely to be eSAF. So it's going to be multiple solutions depending on what kind of thing we're looking at. So, for example, cross-channel ferries may be electric, although the charging speed is an interesting challenge for that particular route. We will see in some cases, biomethanol. But actually, the main fuel we believe going forward is going to be e-ammonia, because that's something that can be produced. It's a relatively mature process. You can absorb the nitrogen you need from the air and use electrolysis and green energy to produce this fuel. And so that's what we believe will be the key fuel going forward. And we're starting to see large shipping companies like MOL and others starting to invest in this technology as well. It might not be the future, though, for passenger travel, because of course passenger travel, ammonia is a toxic substance. So actually those are more likely to be, I think, biomethanol or e-methanol, particularly for ferries. The one I'm not sure on is cruise ships. I don't know which way they're going to go on it, because I think biomethanol will be more expensive than e-ammonia. But I think, on a cruise ship, you want e-ammonia. So that's the one I'm not sure how the cruise ship companies will go on it, to be fair. But for transport, for the bulk of trade, I do think it's going to be e-ammonia produced using green energy.
But that already tells you the complexities that there are into moving and decarbonize the vessels. So you already talk about 4 categories of different kind of fuels, okay? Yeah. for different kind of services that are provided offshore. So that tells you already the complexities that at any level of the supply chain they're going to be.
And it's and actually the thing that makes it so hard, of course, is it's global in nature, right? We can in the UK push people towards electric vehicles, or across Europe, but every company, every country in the world ships things by sea. So you have to take the whole world on this journey with you, and of course there are some countries that want to go on the journey slightly less. But it's that makes it as challenging as anything else, really, I think.
So there's infrastructure at play here, isn't there? You can't fill up one ship with e-ammonia in one port and expect it to suddenly have something else when it gets to the next port on the other side of the pond. What does it look like then in terms of the onshore infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think so. What will happen is, historically, there are a few ports that are really into bunkering. And if you've ever been to Rotterdam and you fly into the airport in Rotterdam, you will fly over so many tanks. And that is just 10 million tons of very low sulfur fuel oil. And that's where people tend to take their ships and fill them up. They need filling up every couple of weeks or up to a month, depending on how big the ship is.
Okay.
What will happen to that infrastructure is, because the e-fuels are less dense, they need to be topped up more frequently, but also because the large amount of electricity required, they will have to be spread around in different places. So you'll start to see more locations producing e-fuel, which is, of course, an opportunity for ports.
Yeah.
And yes, this concept of green shipping corridors is something that is important, because you do need to have fuel on either side of it, or actually we might see dual fuel ships where people can switch fuels. But that is important. That's why ports working together in partnerships is really key. We've been working with something called the Port Innovation Network, Valencia, Port of Tyne, others, and it's really important. They're actually doing a lot more to work together in order to create these green shipping corridors, which is really key, because you have to have the infrastructure in the right place, as you say.
But it is a wonderful opportunity for ports.
It is a huge opportunity. Yeah.
Well, it is an opportunity, but I'm a bit concerned about the optics on this, because one thing I was thinking is how the shipping industry is fairly invisible. You don't see the ships generally. We're not out there. What you do see, of course, is, coastal infrastructure. And if we're going to see a massive maximization of bunkering and additional tanks and additional infrastructure being built to manage, as you say, these fuels, because we need more of them by mass, that actually might create a different sort of backlash with regards to the communities and the people that see that as, is that going forwards? That's just more fuel in more tanks, Does it look the same as a sort of a decarbonisation plan typically does?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's always a challenge with any of these projects, I think, but ultimately, I think there's also a good angle in terms of growth and in terms of green jobs and in terms of benefits to the country as a whole. If we start producing e-fuels rather than importing fuels, that's good for the economy. And it's something we can do, because obviously in the UK we have this abundance of wind energy, and we have an abundance of sea around us. So actually it's a great opportunity in that way. And I think it's about selling that story. And, obviously some people are concerned with wind energy. I actually read an article today from my hometown in Dorset. They want to build a sort of extend Portland Port to build wind turbines. And the amount of comments people go, oh, it's terrible, it's going to look terrible. And it's like, but these are high value, high quality jobs in a part of the UK that absolutely has very few high quality jobs. And I think that's the important thing to remember. Obviously, these things they can be made to look less impactful. I think, there's a lot of work on doing that as well. And there's plenty of brownfield sites in and around our coasts. You think Teesside is one of the obvious options. Port of Tyne is another area that we're potentially looking at. So I don't think it'll be a huge challenge. I don't think it'll be as big an issue as, say, some of the challenges you have with pylons and the like, which go across countryside. These can be sited in locations, but there's plenty of brownfield sites. And as I say, that economic benefit and that job benefit is so key.
So you raise an interesting point there about those adjacent technologies, wind and obviously needing fuels and things. Is there an opportunity to make all this work together? Can we make the e-ammonia through the wind and keep it all fairly sort of localized in that sense?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to someone, and I won't name them or the companies involved, but there was a desire to build an electrolyzer that was connected directly to a wind farm. But actually, the wind farm element, because it's so well known, we've made so many of them, that was fine from the planning application side, but it was the electrolyzer element would have actually held it up. So they just built the wind farm in the end. But yeah, absolutely. If you can avoid all of these grid constraints and you just plumb the electrolyzer straight into the wind energy, then of course, you have a much lower cost of power. To do that, electrolyzers are quite expensive at the moment. They're about $2 million a megawatt, depending on what kind of technology you have. They will come down to below $1 million a megawatt. And once they come down to that cost, I think then you can start to look at using a wind directly or curtailed wind. Whereas at the moment, I think if you spent that much on an electrolyzer, you'd probably want it running 95% of the time. But those costs will come down. The lower cost of energy without having to go through the grid will obviously support that as well. So I think it will certainly happen. You see places with huge vision on this as well. If you look at the Humberside, they have got a very ambitious plan for doing this, and all of the other carbon capture and other technologies. Same with the Northeast. People realise that this is an opportunity in these deindustrialised parts of the UK to create new businesses, create new opportunities for people. And I think there's a lot of visionary people out there trying to make that happen, despite some of the challenges we have with the green agenda at the moment.
Well, but there is a PR problem. We talk about this a lot on the podcast. The opportunities that can come out from this are not just of financial and employment, but also of energy security, reliance, resilience, and everything that comes with it. Okay, so but unfortunately, there is still a PR issue in the green energy or climate tax in general. I wanted to ask you
a divisive thing, right? I don't know how that happened and how it's become a cleavage point. It shouldn't be. It's a huge and people have divided on it really strongly, which again is disappointing. I think people should put themselves in each other's shoes. Yes, I know that there might be some costs, but there are opportunities as well. And I think it's one of those people sort of think about put themselves in each other's shoes and think about other people's views on these things. Then perhaps we would do better. But yes, I do agree. It's a little bit strange at the moment. This negative PR around green tech.
It is. It's just a momentary thing. Yeah, exactly. Look, what I wanted to ask you is obviously there is a lot of hype around the different categories of fuels. Okay, e-methanol and ammonia are the two most discussed together. Then, as we said, with hydrogen and potentially also electricity. From your vantage point, which one feels closest to real-world adoption and why?
So e-methanol is closer because I think the engine technology is a little bit more mature. So it's closer and it will come on stream first. And also a lot of the things like health and safety and handling stuff has been worked through. The Port of Gothenburg's done some really cool stuff on this and on handling and bunkering biomethanol. So that's, and we shouldn't underestimate that side of the equation. So that will come first, but I think e-ammonia will overtake it. And I think some people will bridge straight to the e-ammonia. I think methanol makes sense because there's already quite a bit of biomethanol. I told you about the glut of that earlier in Rotterdam because they built it ahead of supply. So actually some people will be able to get a good deal on that if they're burning some biomethanol, and we'll take advantage of that. But of course that cost will then come up, and then we'll move to e-methanol and then e-ammonia. Biomethanol, I'm sure you've talked about this loads of times on your podcast, the challenge of using feedstock or land for food, for fuels is obviously a challenge, and ultimately there will be a maximum amount of that we can do. So, I think biomethanol will certainly be part of the mix, probably, for many applications. Methanol, because it's a little bit safer, a little bit less toxic, for passenger ferry applications. But the majority will be ammonia. And if you look at the cost projections, by 2030 to 2040, that transition will be forced by Fuel EU and other regulatory costs. But by 2040 on, it should be cheaper as electrolyzer costs come down. Sorry, I couldn't quite get that out, did I?
The hotspot is the electrolyzer.
That is, if you look at one of these plants, your two costs are on the CapEx side, your electrolyzer, and on the OpEx side, your electricity. It's as simple as that. The other elements, especially for, I'm talking e-ammonia here, especially for e-ammonia, which is a mature process to make that, capturing nitrogen from the air. For e-methanol, it's slightly more complicated because you need to capture CO2, and then you have the two sources, obviously direct air capture, which is still technologically immature and adds quite a lot of cost. I mean, that will come down, but I think some people, I'm a little bit skeptical on direct air capture, honestly. I don't know if it'll ever scale to what we need. It'd be lovely if it did. It would fix so many problems. We could just suck the CO2 out the air, right? But I don't think we're going to get that lucky. And obviously biogenic, which a lot of people raise questions about how carbon neutral that is. Obviously, that's probably a short-term source for e-methanol. But and that adds greater cost and complexity and actually land use. If you look at these direct air capture plants, they're anticipated to be quite large.
Huge. Yeah.
So for that basis, just the maturity of the process around ammonia, once we start to see the electrolyzer costs come down, it will be much of a muchness with current oil prices, which of course oil is going to only become more expensive. It's harder to extract. It has carbon costs associated with it. So, yeah.
But there could be also the e-methanol one of the reasons why, let's say, the legacy oil and gas industry is pushing a lot on carbon capture and storage, on CCS, or carbon capture use and storage, or whatever it is, the acronym in vogue that week. Because it is directly related to what is their core activities, and will allow them, let's say, a diversification of their income stream.
Yeah, and I think capturing that carbon and then using it is obviously beneficial, but at best it's neutral, right? Because you're still going to at some point release it. Whereas I think obviously with the ammonia, you release nitrogen. There's so much nitrogen in the air, and it won't have that issue that we have seen with obviously CO2 and global warming. Obviously, these companies want to protect their business, and I think some processes will require the emission of carbon. If we can capture it, it's really, really good. And if we can use it for something else, again, it's really, really good. But I think, in the most part, it'd be best if they sequester as much of that as they can, because obviously that'd be beneficial rather than, it's nice to get one or two hits out of the carbon, if you will. But it'd be better not to release it at all, I think.
What about aviation technologies? There are wind assist propulsion systems, rigid sails, jet sails. We actually had on the podcast the guys of GT Wings. They develop a jet sail technology. How seriously should the industry take these solutions? Because they seem like quick wins.
Really seriously, right? Because actually, if you start to look at the Fuel EU costs, and it's quite complicated legislation, but effectively you have to reduce the percentage against a certain target each year. And if you're ahead of that percentage, you get credits, and actually you can use those credits going into the future. They never disappear. Now, if you think that by 2050 it has to be half, off the top of my head, I think 2030 is 3%, I think, and then 2035 is 6.5%. So if you can get a sail, something as simple as one of these sails, and I know they're not simple, I know they're aerodynamically very advanced, but we're talking about comparing it with sort of electrolyzer plants, new engines, etc. And you can cut 10%, and you can prove that, and you can do that quickly. You're banking all of that credit across your whole fleet very, very effectively. So if I was in shipping, if I owned a shipping company, I would be looking at it very quickly, especially for intra-EU, and trying to see how much we could be saving. And look, obviously it's reduced carbon straight away. It's quite a sensible technology. I've seen some of the claims, where it works best and where it doesn't, I think be interesting, and the true savings in real world applications, of course. But Yeah, I think you would be foolish not to look at those type of solutions. And they're really cool, right? Say sails, but these things are just they're so aerodynamically advanced. It's they're incredible, really, really are.
If you want to use a metaphor, this aviation technologies work as an energy efficiency device, which in financial numbers, they generate immediate returns, quick returns. So from an IRR perspective, when they work, obviously, because there is also some that don't, but they do generate very quick returns.
And if you think, say, if you have a pool of something like 5 ships, you could be talking over 10 years, 15 years, €1 billion, €1 billion in terms of fuel EU costs. If you can,
that's madness.
If you can actually bank a credit against that, and look at these sales investment, I think it's an obvious solution, and I think they should persist into the long term, because e-ammonia obviously will require a lot of energy to produce. If we can use wind power to reduce the amount of e-ammonia being used, obviously that's beneficial as well. So it should be a long-term part of the future, I think, for sure.
And we are going to have to retrofit these ships at some point soon anyway, if we're going to start using different fuels. I'm still stuck on the sort of the changing of the energy density of different fuels, they're going to require different engines, they're going to require different fuel storage on board, which is going to ultimately change the haulage capacities and things here as well. So if we're going to have to make all these changes anyway, I mean, stick a sail on it as well while you're at it, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And I think what we'll see is these fuels are less dense. They'll still want to carry as much freight, and that's why I think you'll see more bunkering and more filling up. But you're absolutely right. And look, a lot of people see that as a challenge, but these regulations in maritime move on all the time. For example, ships now have to have double skinned fuel tanks for safety and preventing any leakages. So these regulations, they do come and go, and obviously companies are used to modifying what they have. I think there'll be a long tail. We talked a little bit about this before this call, but bulk carrying, which is a little bit low margin, for example, they'll probably be last to decarbonise. And obviously you have parts of the world which won't necessarily enforce some of these regulations. So you can see sort of ships will be displaced into different areas. But yeah, the big companies, Maersk is really leading the way on this, MOL and others, they're making big investments. DFDS, another good example. They're making big investments. They're making new ships. And I think, the technology itself, it's a reciprocating engine. It's same as a normal diesel engine. It's got pre-burners because of the lower density, but it's and there's some work to do to make sure we don't get the equivalent of methane slip in these engines. But it's relatively well understood, and so it won't be as wholesale a change as say we've had in cars, where we've had to replace an entire reciprocating engine with batteries or what have you, and so in some ways it's easier, and it'll be easier from an operations perspective, because you won't have to optimize your charging and do all these things that we have to do in the EHGV world. Or bus world, you'll just fill it up as you normally do. You'll just fill it up twice as often.
Let's stay for a moment onto the policy, incentives, and regulation part of it. A few weeks ago, the US tanked years of negotiations on shipping emissions reductions at the IMO, literally right at the finish line. I've read and heard stories of political and personal threats with threats of tariffs, visa denials. I mean, something that you watch in movies.
Yeah.
What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, it's obviously disappointing. I think in EU that we'll still progress with the Fuel EU piece, and Europe will decarbonise quicker than other countries. Obviously, you can see sort of why they've done that. They don't want to add any cost into shipping, and obviously there is this politicization of this issue, which, as I sort of referred to earlier, is unhelpful. The two biggest economies, though, America and China, this is probably an area they agree on, right? They don't want to be shipping those goods for as cheaply as possible. So that's the tension that we have. But I think, what will happen is we'll lead the way on this in Europe. And once that e-ammonia is as cheap as oil, and bear in mind that China doesn't particularly produce any oil, so actually that's why they've got so many electric cars, right? So they'll eventually have an incentive to go this way as well. You'll see those people come with us, and the hope is, of course, that in Europe we will and the UK will have led the way, and we'll get some benefit from being first movers of these kind of technologies, and so hopefully it will benefit us in the round. And I think, as I say, the technology will get cheaper, and when it does, countries will switch. And as I say, some of the biggest countries that don't produce oil will need this. And we will still see, talk about the Middle East, they were particularly strong-armed, weren't they, out of it? But it's a huge opportunity for them as oil becomes less used. You think about Saudi Arabia, all of that solar energy, some of the electrolyzer projects that they're looking at out there, 2-3 gigawatts, when we're looking at 100 to 200 megawatts. They're different scale.
Yeah.
So there's rhetoric and there's what will happen in the real world. And I think in the real world, the journey will continue. And it will continue in the US as well, right? A lot of this technologies, electrolyzers, green energy, digital energy, it's a super innovative place. They're not going to stop either. So I think, sometimes it's easy to be worried about the rhetoric, but in the real world, things continue. We're talking about vehicle electrification. Vehicle electrification is proceeding really quickly in the US because they have cheap energy and lower interest rates, and therefore companies just electrifying because it makes sense. So there's what's being said at the top, and there's what's happening in the real world.
Ironically, though, some of the most disappointed about this postponement at the IMO were shipping companies, as they seem already ready and probably already invested in some of technologies and solutions. So we know that one of the worst things that can happen to any company, it is uncertainty at legislative level.
Yeah, and you're right, and we talked about Maersk earlier. They have the Molly Maersk Center for Maritime Decarbonisation. They're absolutely leading the way in this. Companies like Wärtsilä are making engines. So, of course, it's a bit of an impact to them. But as I say, I think, and it's been one of those industries, we were talking about this internally, like, is it too soon for e-fuels? Should we wait a bit longer? It hasn't quite gone at the speed that we'd have thought. And the same with other technologies such as shoreside power to connect ships when they're alongside. But I think now you're going to see it lift off because that regulation is coming in, and I think because it will make sense. And I think, as you point out, big companies like Maersk, they've invested a lot of money, so it's going to happen. And how can ports in Europe take advantage of that opportunity? Again, if you're bunkering e-fuel here in Europe and not using bunkering fuel elsewhere in the world, that's an opportunity. That's a financial opportunity, right? So
why don't we talk for a second about strategy then, and more importantly about the complexity of certain strategies. You work on large-scale strategy programs where geopolitics suddenly becomes a defining factor, right? Thinking about, for example, what you told us behind stage about the Zaragoza case, first with the restriction on Chinese transformers from the Biden administration, and then after that skyrocketed demand for you guys. But then after the Trump administration started with tariffs and whatnot, how do you build a strategy that can survive that level of disruption?
It's so difficult. That Zaragoza factory has been there since some time crazy, like 1910, right?
Just give an overview of the case here for the listeners.
Yeah, so we make transformers, which is an electrical component that essentially changes the voltage of electricity. It's quite a mature technology. It's been around for hundreds of years, not quite hundreds of years, but it's been around for hundreds of years. We have a factory in Zaragoza where we make these things, and as with many things, most production of this has moved to the Far East and to China, where they build things more cheaply. It's still quite manual how they're made because it's a lot of copper windings, going to be done very meticulously. Anyway, the Biden administration, they said, we're not buying any more Chinese transformers. Now, these components, they are so important for the energy transition because you have so much more effectively things that need energy and needs voltage to be changed. They're really important because they support things such as data centers, which is a huge growth area, and the amount of energy demand that AI is using. So these things, which have been with us for 100 years, are now the hottest property in the world, right?
Waiting time
You have
off.
to queue for 5 years to get a transformer.
There you go.
And so we scaled the factory in Zaragoza, and of course then we got this bump because the Biden administration, he said, well, we're not buying Chinese transformers anymore, so we obviously start exporting pretty much everything we made there to the US. And then of course what comes along is there's tariffs saying, well, we're going to put 30-40% on that, so we can no longer export them to the US. That's kind of okay because the demand is crazy for these things. But we've recently set up a factory in the US in a place called South Boston, Virginia, and now we're making them there. And it's difficult to sort of know where to make these investments, but that's why we're starting to regionalize our strategy a bit more. This deglobalization thing means that you have to be more local in what you're doing. You have to lobby more locally. You have to think in a place-based way, I would say, and think about what technologies you need in certain places. And so that's really key to some of our thinking as we are sort of going through this deglobalization moment. But it is hard. It is hard because you never know what's next. People say perma crisis, and you sort of never know what's next, do you?
It's crazy. And while before we were talking about time frames, let's say of 5, 10, 15 years, now we're talking about time frames of months, if not weeks, in certain very extreme cases and scenarios. So supply chain are getting, we think about COVID was a disruption, which it was, of course.
Yep.
But I mean, how can this more fragmented supply chain can shape the decarbonization decision for ports, for ship owners, for energy developers?
It is difficult, and the world is getting more difficult to navigate, to use a term. But I think with some of these supply chain choices, you want to try and maintain that flexibility around how you do things and what you do and what you can use various facilities for. And look, a lot of the strategy work we do, it's about making bets, right? And hoping that more than half of those bets pay off, because that's how we grow the business, because none of us have a crystal ball. But I think if we look going forward, this deglobalization piece that we're living through, it's going to continue for a little bit. The pendulum will inevitably swing back, as it always does. And I think, the way to navigate it is you just have to, I think, the first thing I would say is always try and do the right thing regardless. And then at least, generally you do the right thing, good things happen. So I think, and decarbonisation is the right thing. It's also the right thing for our business, transparently.
It is.
And yeah, we have to navigate.
It's the future.
It's the future.
One way or another. One way or another. You can talk about climate. Here we're talking about a million other things that are outside of the climate narrative. First and foremost, energy security and resilience and being autonomous and independent. So it is not just about the climate, which obviously it is a major part of it. What I wanted to ask you is about Hitachi. We haven't talked about Hitachi that much, okay? And obviously there is a lot to talk. And you guys work, it's a behemoth, okay? You work across energy, mobility, digital systems. What are the key technologies or projects you're bringing to the maritime decarbonization table? You mentioned electrolyzers, but is there anything else or a particular project?
Yeah. So we don't technically make electrolyzers. We make a lot of the energy components that feed an electrolyzer. If you imagine this thing uses 100 megawatts or up to a gigawatt, that requires high quality electricity converted to the right voltage and converted to DC in a lot of cases. So we build that, and that's a big opportunity for us. And we build so many of the components that this system will need. So, for example, we do battery management, we do shoreside power, we do static frequency converters. We manufacture all of these things. But the secret sauce is really tying them all together and integrating them into a single project. And I think that's what we're trying to do at the moment. And one thing we did in Gothenburg with Stena, which was quite cool, was we used a product we call HyFlex, which is essentially a container that has a hydrogen fuel cell in there, and we were using that to do peak shaving for shoreside power when the Stena ferries were in alongside. So that's the kind of integration that we're doing. And that's the key bit of it, is really making all these technologies talk to each other. You think you have somewhere like Barcelona. Barcelona might have 5 or 6 cruise ships at one point. So effectively, you're adding like a city of 50,000 to your energy grid. And you might go, okay, well, we're scheduling those. We know where they are and we'll manage the energy accordingly. But of course, we're talking about ships. We're talking about weather. They might not arrive when you thought they were going to arrive. They might have an issue with the charging. They might have last mile batteries. Those last mile batteries might not charge very well because they're a bit old. So making everything talk to each other and working as an ecosystem is so key. And making all these companies work together and organizations work together is so key. So you need, for any of this, it's ports, it's shipping companies, it's OEMs like us, it's motor OEMs, people like Wärtsilä and others, all have to come together to do, and obviously governments, and obviously ship owners, ship operators, port operators, and all of the different players all have to come together to make it happen. And that's always the challenge. It's not really in one person's hand.
Though. The coordination behind the stage to something like that. You don't think about it. You say, oh, there are 5 cruise ships into the harbor. But then behind the stage, oh, shit, I have to refill 5 cruise ships into the harbor.
But imagine, when those 5 cruise ships are at the harbor, I've said they use as much energy as a town for 50,000 people. They're pumping out enough CO2 for a power station that for a town of 50,000 people. And in somewhere like Barcelona, that's right downtown. You wouldn't build a power station there pumping out CO2. You'd never get away with it. So you kind of think about, and other nasties from the fuel they burn. So, just even things like local air quality and all of that just will massively increase. And I think, but as I say, it's about getting everyone on the same page and working together. And I think that's probably why I like this sector, because there's a lot of like-minded people working together, trying to move towards the goal. And I think that's why it's so interesting, and that's why it's great actually meeting you both, because of course it's just nice to talk to people who sort of share the vision, really.
And there is one thing that I noticed. Doesn't matter if you work in climate techs, fossil fuels, or whatever, but if you are in the context of the maritime or shipping, there is always that love for the sea that everybody shares. All of them. It doesn't matter the industry you work with. If it is sea related, oceans related, everybody loves the ocean. And it's amazing. I love that.
Exactly. And I grew up, as I said, in a town called Weymouth by the sea, and I've always loved it too. And I think it's in some ways it's out of sight what we're doing in maritime, because people don't touch it as regularly as, say, cars or trains or what have you, or even aviation. If you think more people like to get on a plane than a boat to go somewhere in our country, at least. It's such an important sector, as you said, for everything. So much of what we eat and wear and use and consume, it comes via sea, right? So it's our lifeline, and it always has been our lifeline. And obviously, if we can keep that lifeline safe and protected and decarbonised, and it's better for everyone. And it's not necessarily, as I say, this just about, as you said, not just about the green story, is it? It's about jobs. It's about security. And for me, I like technology as well. So it's just hugely interesting. It's hugely interesting.
It is. Let's take for a second sort of a peripheral view. You spent time across extremely energy intensive sectors, right? But when it comes to direction, some sectors like private transportation seems to have a clear path toward electrification. Okay, that's easy. It's implemented. It's going. It's growing. Done. Next. When you compare maritime decarbonisation versus, for example, data centers versus, for example, aviation, what stands out? Which sectors feel further along, and which one it is the one that is furthest behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think maritime is lagging behind the other sectors.
You think? Really?
Well, it's in reality, it's quite green. We produce 3 or 4% of CO2, right? But if you think about the sheer volume of shipping, that you could argue that's not bad. Obviously, it's still bad, but
in proportion.
But I think it's taken a little bit of time, as I say, for Maritime to go on the journey, but that's actually really beneficial because we can learn some of the challenges from other decarbonisation journeys that we've been on, such as EHGV, which was something we started back in 2015, 2016, and spun out a business called Zero Carbon that does battery management and other bits and pieces for buses. So I do think we're a little bit behind, but Maritime is going to catch up and accelerate. I think, as with all sectors have their challenges, and the challenges are different. For aviation, you have relatively few OEMs, you have a lot of airports, but it's quite an easy thing to sort of get everyone together and go in one direction. And we can see that the legislation pushes that. And actually, there's quite a lot of PE-backed funding. For example, we're working with a company called Arcadia, based in Denmark, 240 megawatt ESAF site, because those projects seem a bit more fundable because the legislation is clearer and agreed everywhere. Road, as you say, it's well understood how we will decarbonise road, but you've got 30 million car owners in this country, or cars in this country, and not all of them want to go on this journey. So you've got a different challenge there, right? You've got a different challenge about making people want to change what they do. And we've just had this road charging announced in the UK, and that's an interesting thing. I did a bit of work on road charging back in 2017, 2018, and I think it has so many benefits potentially in terms of managing and modeling behavior and helping to sort of effectively change when people use the roads and incentivize certain behaviors. But it's a very unpopular thing, right? Every time road charging has been put to a vote, it's never won. So
let me tell you something, Grant. Let's stay on this for a second. I grew up, I was born and grew up in a country where there are tolls.
Yeah.
And for our main highways, the road quality is fantastic, but for the vast majority of the network, no, they aren't. So if I have to choose a tax that I'm happy to pay, that is literally one of those. There are no tolls in the UK, which is fantastic, a civil thing to do. Okay, the roads on major highways, yes, some are not great, but the majority are pretty good. Okay, there are way other taxes that I'm not that happy to pay.
I get what you mean. It is interesting. Whenever you go to France and you're like driving down the autoroute, you're like, this is brilliant.
How much expensive are those?
Yeah, exactly.
Nuts.
It's like I've just spent £30. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And look, I think it's one of those things. If something has been free, charging for it all of a sudden becomes quite challenging, doesn't it? That's the challenge with that sector. Is you've got to get so many people to go on the journey. But Maritime is an interesting mix. You have a couple of big companies that will lead the charge. We've talked about them already. Then you have the sort of smaller SME tail, and we have a similar challenge actually with HGVs, electrification. they are. Most HGV companies are SMEs. And if you're saying, well, you need to replace your £78,000 truck with a £300,000 truck, they're like, I can't do that. And the infrastructure isn't there. Now, we actually have done something recently quite interesting with Transport for Scotland, where we're going to set up a funding facility for HGVs, SME HGVs that they can use, and effectively they don't take the cost or the risk of the battery, which is the main cost component. We'll fund that, and the Scottish government will fund that, and then they'll still buy their trucks. So we are looking at ways and means getting around that SME piece with companies. But yeah, that'll be the challenge. And another fascinating example, we were talking to the port of Vienna and the port of Constanta. So obviously Vienna's on the Danube. And rivers are going crazy in terms of huge growth in terms of shipping on rivers. But again, a lot of them's SMEs, quite old barges and the like, and getting them to convert is quite tricky. But of course, on that route, they have a lot of these Danube cruise ships, and they're actually very keen to get a hydrogen and be green, and obviously they're quite cash rich because those are expensive trips, right? So there's so many dynamics and so many companies and people that have to take that risk. And I guess being in a big company like Hitachi with our abilities, but also our ability to fund these things, it means that we can sort of create those markets. And we talked about it. Being Japanese, we do take a longer view. We do talk about social innovation, and we mean it as a company. That comes from our Japanese heritage, where Japanese companies are expected to support their communities, and that's very much part of the DNA, and why we're sort of going on this journey, and we do call it social innovation business for that reason. But yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned the rivers. We worked on a project about a year ago on cargo transport onto UK waterways with electrified autonomous cargo vessels. It was fantastic. The results on emission savings up to a certain tonnage, because, for example, for large trucks, the efficiency that they carry, the emissions per ton transported is still really, really good. Okay. But the opportunities that there are to revitalize part of the economy is just like that, by moving away some cargo from roads onto waterways. It is amazing. If you look, though, in 5 to 10 years ahead, what's the most realistic version of progress in general in maritime decarbonisation? What will actually look different?
I think we will see we will have shoreside power. That will be mandated. That will come in. We will see a lot more. We will see ammonia will have really taken off, and much of the container and car traffic, deep sea traffic, I think, will be powered by e-ammonia, and we will see that. And there will be lots of places that are producing that e-ammonia very successfully and will have created profitable businesses. I think Denmark is a great example, because they have so much wind energy and such low energy costs.
Yes.
We've already seen them taking a lead on eSAF, so I think they're going to do very well out of it. And I think the UK has that opportunity as well. The worry, I think, is around all of these competing consumers of large amounts of energy. And we saw this in Teesside recently, where there was 2 applications. One was for an e-fuel site, and one was for an AI data center. And the AI data center won. And I think that's a bit disappointing, because e-fuels were at the start of the journey, and we can create a genuine industry for Europe and our country. Whereas that AI data center will effectively be full of US products. So you could argue that there is almost certainly, we should be thinking about what we need.
It tells you the mad period we're living in, where this rush, crazy at crazy pace that we're doing at any level regarding artificial intelligence, is taking some tolls also in other areas that are out of the environment in general, but also local economies and potential local manufacturing. It's it's I would say sad, because still they generate work and employment in the area.
They create work and employment, but it's often indirect. So if you think, a big data center won't employ that many people for the amount of space it takes. And I think, if you put these big data centers places that have already been deindustrialized, but they have good connections to electricity, are we fixing some of the challenges that we talk about around leveling up and other
that's
bits
the
and
asset.
pieces?
Yeah, that's the asset.
And I think actually people will work out a way to do the AI stuff using less energy, and you could be looking at a danger of a stranded asset. And it's a fascinating one, because I had a slightly different job a couple of years back, and we had a bunch of colo data centers, and we closed them all down.
Really?
Everyone was going to the cloud, and now all of a sudden,
what would it work now? What would it be worth now?
even people who work in strategy don't always get it wrong. I told you it was making bets.
Yeah, I know. Wonderful, Grant. This was a fantastic conversation. So I thank you very much for being with us on Raw Green. And I do very much look forward to have another chat with you.
I would love to do another chat, and perhaps once we've got one of these projects away, we can come back and talk to that. We've got a couple of things in the pipeline that if they happen, I think will be really cool. So if we get those away, touch wood, then it would be lovely to come back and talk a little bit more about them for sure.
It seems we have a strategy, you and I.
There we go.
Thank you, Grant. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Grant. Take care.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to this episode of Raw Green. If you made it this far, you probably enjoyed it. So don't forget to hit subscribe and follow our podcast. It's an awesome way to support our community. At Obi, we're all about research, life cycle assessment, and the green tech innovation. Stay in touch through our socials or visit our website. Links are ready for you in the description. Catch you in the next episode. Ciao!